So I'm not trying to clickbait you guys with the title or anything. I'm just very overly critical when it comes to how I would rate video games. And Spider-Man 2, though incredible, is just another Spider-Man game. So to paint a picture, I am quite a big Spider-Man fan. You know, I've played all of the previous older Spider-Man games that were on PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and so on and so forth. And while each of them had their own unique mechanics, the one thing that I would heavily criticize about Spider-Man is that pretty much all of the games are just the same as one another, but more refined. The thing is, at first glance, obviously this game looks stupendous, but at the same time, you gotta understand that this is basically the same map from the first game and even the spin-off Miles Morales game. Navigating New York as Spider-Man is fun no matter what you're doing, especially with the new gliding mechanic, but we'll get into that in a bit. First of all, I'd like to report that pretty much every mechanic from the first game has been refined slowly over time in this one. I did end up playing the Miles Morales game, and that kind of fleshed out Miles's gameplay a lot. But in this game, it's nice to see both Miles and Peter having their gameplay tightened up even more. It's a lot easier to do combos. You have a couple different options when it comes to your special moves, but there is still a little too much enemies in this game, like way too many of them. They just kind of copy and paste them, especially near the end. Traversal has gotten a big upgrade because of the gliding, which actually feels great. Like this could have been its own mechanic in another game. If you guys ever ended up playing the prototype games, that's what the gliding really reminds me of in here. Like you got all sorts of air gusts that you can end up using to either keep your momentum or even launch yourself up. You can level up and get different traversal upgrades, which will give you extra jumps or extra glide time or swing speed, stuff like that. Because yes, that's right, there is a skill tree in this game, albeit extremely simple. Basically, with your power moves, you usually have two options for each of the face buttons, and you'll kind of unlock them as you progress through the story. So the next thing to talk about is the map itself, the city, which the city is great. Is this game open world for the sake of being open world? Yes, it's not something like Elden Ring or even Zelda Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, where the open world complements the base game. This is just, oh, you're in New York again. And as beautiful as the city is, there is nothing to do outside of just get a bunch of dumb collectibles or do side missions. I think it's no surprise that most people are probably just going to be playing the main story. And I'm not saying that doing the side missions isn't fun, because it is, because the game itself is innately fun. But what I struggle with is a lot of times I would find myself grinding side missions so that I could get levels, because I needed to increase my damage as enemies were getting way too spongy in the main story. Even once I ended up having max damage, the enemies were still way too tanky. And unfortunately, the combat would boil down to smacking enemies and trying to dodge all of their attacks so that you could get your special moves, which was you just watching a canned animation. Think of a game like Genshin Impact, where you're basically just trying to alt spam because it gives you invulnerability frames and clears a lot of enemies. Suddenly all of the nuance to the combat just went out the window near the end game. Boss fights also slowly became a slog. Thankfully, there wasn't too many boss fights, but I think that the reason why I'm so reserved and conflicted on the end game is because the story dragged out like crazy. I would recommend that you want to try and rush through the main story as quickly as possible, though, even if you do plan on 100%ing the game, because a lot of side missions in the overworld won't unlock until you've progressed far enough in the story. So speaking of the side missions, what's the other big incentive to doing them? Well, when you end up doing these side missions, you'll end up working on a percentage value to that district, which will slowly end up unlocking, tokens and stuff to upgrade some of your things. But the fast traveling is going to be unlocked as you progress through an area and do side missions in it. Honestly, I think that this is the most impressive fast travel system I've seen in a video game. I love the fact that you have to earn the right to fast travel in the district. And even so, there's no fast travel points that you have to go and click on. You literally just fast travel from the map, and the game is going to throw you onto whatever street your cursor was aiming on. Mad props for the devs for that idea. I think a lot of games could benefit from having something more organic like that. I won't get into spoilers yet, I'll save that for a little bit later, but I will say that the story in this game is stupendous. It's like a Spider-Man movie, but you're playing it. Like, props to the writers and everything, like all of the banter of all the characters. There was nothing that really stuck out to me as being like annoying or weird. Like, it was really, really solid.
Maybe if we don't move, they won't see us.
Like, for me, I'm usually really, really good at calling out plot twists, but I did not see where this plot was going with the main villain. That was a nice surprise. Okay, so if you guys aren't interested in spoilers, you can skip to here. All right, is everybody gone? Okay, let's get into it. So the main story took me around 18 hours to complete. I do personally think that it should have been a little bit on the shorter end because the end of the game really started to drag it out. Another thing that kind of hurts the story with this game is the marketing, because all of the marketing centralized around Venom being the main villain. And while, yes, that's going to end up being the main incentive for a lot of people to get this game, I think that the story would have been so much better if nobody knew Venom was in this game as we went into it. The main villain for about like 70% of the game is actually going to end up being Kraven, which is like the Beastmaster Hunter guy. Essentially, he's trying to capture all of the other villains and superheroes so that he can hunt them Predator style. The thing is, it's gonna take you a few hours worth of playtime before you realize that Venom is even hinted at in the game, because Harry Osborn is kind of, you know, he's kind of sick, right? And throughout the story, you'll notice that he's slightly getting better and better. And then eventually you find out that it's the symbiote that's been healing him. Insert the black suit. And it's pretty much the same as the Spider-Man 3 movie, where Peter slowly starts becoming more and more corrupt. The power-ups are really cool, and you know, you can level up all of the abilities and make them stronger. But let's fast forward a little bit. The breaking point is when Peter ends up going to sleep at one point. He kind of just goes like completely unhinged and even fights against like Miles and MJ and stuff. There's this one scene that was like just so cool to me.
MJ.
And it started to get my mind racing and really excited at the notion that maybe Peter would end up being Venom this time. I think that would have been stronger narratively, but I totally understand why they didn't do that, and that's fine. So we fast forward a little bit more, we go through an arc, and eventually Venom ends up getting, you know, taken off of Peter, and then he's kind of got it contained in a bottle. And this is where I assumed Kraven would end up becoming Venom, just because he's big and bulky, and it would just make a lot of sense for him to be, you know, him to synergize with Venom well. But instead, Venom ends up going back to Harry, and for whatever reason, he just suddenly turns into Venom right away, which didn't make any sense to me. Either way, I don't care. It ended up having one of the coolest scenes in most recent video games, where you get to play as Venom during an escape sequence, which I really, really appreciated. I was really hoping that by beating the game, you would unlock Venom as a playable character, because Ultimate Spider-Man back on PS2 already had a very similar plot to this game, and in that game you could play as Venom and Spider-Man. It was just completely optional. So while I did appreciate being able to play Venom for one small mission, and it did feel very fleshed out, I kind of really wanted the game to go a little bit further with it. But my biggest criticism towards the story is near the end, it went on far too long. Like, the setup for the ending and just how long it took to get to the ending was ridiculous. The boss fight with Venom took like an hour. He had so many phases and none of them really changed between each other. He was just super duper spongy. You would basically fall into the rhythm with the game where you fight a bunch of enemies, you have a little bit of dialogue, you fight a bunch more enemies, you have more dialogue, you fight even more enemies, and then you get a cutscene. And that unfortunately became the formula for the game near the last 25%, and I didn't appreciate it. It also made me more and more frustrated with the combat, because as I mentioned previously, I had max damage, and yet the enemies were still taking an absurd amount of time to beat. And I'll point out I was on story mode difficulty. Make fun of me if you will, but I always choose easy mode in these types of games because all harder difficulty does is makes the game take longer to beat. I'll always crank the difficulty if it means that the AI gets smarter or they get new attacks or something with the game evolves in a meaningful way. But when it's just, you know, sliding a bar for damage numbers, I don't care. Especially in a single player game, which goddamn, this game needed to be multiplayer. That would have been huge. Okay, so what do I end up rating this game? I mean, frankly speaking, I think I'm gonna get rid of the arbitrary score because I find it to be so difficult to manage this section of the video. Like, on one hand, if I compare this game to every other game in existence, it's a 5 out of 5. Of course it's a masterclass game. It's got the highest production I've ever seen, and as far as generic open world games are concerned, this is the pick of the litter. It's top tier. But the thing is, my own personal opinion of the game and my own personal rating of this in the wide array of video games as a whole would actually be a lot lower score just because of the fact that this game is just another Spider-Man game. Like, as harsh as it might sound, I'll say that this game is like the movies, where they are a blockbuster hit, they're super entertaining to play through, but they give nothing to your soul. It's like the Doritos of video games, but this is way higher quality than Doritos.
I didn't know there were bears in these woods.
Like, speaking of superhero games, I would say that the Arkham Asylum and Arkham City games are so much stronger, not only narratively, but the gameplay as well. Spider-Man in a lot of ways kind of just borrows from a lot of Sony's top games. Like, even the fact that you can play as MJ in this game was just kind of a crappier version of Last of Us. With that said, I wouldn't necessarily say that any of the many different mini games weren't fully fleshed out in this game. It's just I couldn't help but feel when I was playing the side content that I just wanted to get back to the main content. And unfortunately, there is no incentive to explore the world and do anything but the main story for me personally. Again, I can still very easily recommend this game, but I'm glad that I bought a physical copy of this because I'm going to sell it and get my money back. Because I knew going into this that it wasn't gonna be anything more than just another Spider-Man game. Now, if Spider-Man's your favorite game, go get it. But for me, I need a little bit more.
Nice. Wow, really nice.